Order is accordingly suspended in the context as outlined.
Introduction of bills, public business.
Public business is now the order of the day.
Mr. President, instant order is order number 6. Order number 6, in the name of the honored leader of the Senate, to move the passing of a resolution that the Parliament of Barbados take note of the report of the Parliamentary Forum Commission 2024 and its recommendations.
Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me begin by apologizing, first of all, for my voice, which has been a little bit husky for the last couple of days, but I will do my best to make sure that I am audible and understood. Before I get into my actual presentation, though, I do wish to take the opportunity, certainly on behalf of the honorable senators on the government side, and I would perhaps even risk to do so on behalf of the Senate more broadly, to extend our support for Jamaica that has been battered over the last 24 hours by Hurricane Melissa, and to say what they know already from Barbados. Barbados stands with you. Barbados stands ready to support Jamaica through the normal channels, and I would want to encourage Barbadians who have seen the photos, who have seen the videos, who have felt as if this has happened to their brothers and their sisters, that they put down their phones for a moment and take the opportunity to find a reputable agency, institution, service organization, and to join the donation effort in support of Jamaica. I also want to take the opportunity to thank the people of Jamaica for, even in the midst of their hours of need, they supported our Barbadians in Jamaica. Barbados has, as we know, many Barbadian students at the Mona campus in Kingston, and I know for a fact that there are many Jamaican families that took in Barbadian students into their homes along with their own families to ride out the storm. And I want to express appreciation for the people of Jamaica for always, always living their motto that out of many, we are one people. So, Mr. President, I also want to, in that context, as Minister of Energy on this occasion, to also say that currently the Barbados Light and Power is in the chair of the CARILEC, which is the Caribbean Association of Regional Utilities, and as such, they are mobilizing the regional response on behalf of all of our utilities to go into Jamaica, as they have done in the immediate aftermath of the passage of Hurricane Beryl for our other Caribbean neighbors, and they are doing so as we speak for Jamaica. And I want that, where possible, that we can also coalesce our support behind the Barbados Light and Power Company as we go into Jamaica as an energy sector across the region to help that country restore its electricity supply. So those would be my initial unrelated remarks for this report today. Mr. President, the report that is before us has been with us for some time, and we have heard the debate when it took place in the other place, where we spoke about a range of things, and in summary, it is an extensive report that the Chamber is considering today, Mr. President. The report captures a number of recommendations, which I will go over in my own presentation, but I will confine myself to 4 main areas today in my presentation because, as you indicated, Mr. President, we have a member of our chamber who sat in on the commission and who sat in on the process of arriving at the report that is before us. And so, in the person of Madam Deputy President, we want to be able to hear as broadly as we can and with as much depth and breadth as we can what the considerations were before the commission based on their terms of reference. And so I am looking forward to hearing her provision, and it is on that basis that I am grateful for the agreement of the Leader of Opposition-Based Business here in the Senate to allow for me to suspend the respective standing order and to give her additional time to give that depth and breadth. So, Mr. President, let's go. We have a couple of things that this report we have a couple of things that this report is calling on us to do. Yes, Mr. President, the report looks at Parliament. Yes, it looks at the way in which our Parliament is structured, what it is doing, what it's not doing, where we want it to go, where perhaps it has come from. And it does all of those things, Mr. President, in a lengthy document. But first and foremost, Mr. President, what this report actually does is that it asks us to examine ourselves. It asks us to examine who we are as Barbadians and what our parliamentary democracy is meant to look like in the third decade of the 21st century. The fact that Barbados has one of the oldest parliaments, in fact, the third oldest parliament in the Commonwealth, does not necessarily mean that it is something that tradition should replace with longevity. There's a quote that says, I don't remember exactly how it goes or who said it, but it says, longevity does not equal perfection, and history, while honorable, does not excuse stagnation. And so here we are this morning looking at how our Parliament does not stagnate, does not become a slave to tradition, but honors tradition while moving into a new space which outlines effectively a blueprint for transformation. So in 2023, in May, this commission was established and it had a mandate. The four things that I'm going to speak about today, Mr. President, will be covered in that mandate. One, I'm going to talk about what the commission was established to do and what it actually recommended. I'm going to attempt to situate what it recommended within the context of what the public's assumptions are about what Parliament does and does not do and how it is functioning or is not functioning. And then thirdly, I am going to speak about the recommendations that the Commission made and that there were a number of minority opinions that I believe that Her Honor, Madam Deputy President, will be in the ideal pole position to expand on even further. And then, Mr. President, I will just close my presentation. So in the first instance, in my first layer of intervention, Mr. President, the role of the Commission was to review the structure and the operations of Parliament. It was to recommend reforms to strengthen the independence, transparency, and efficiency of Parliament, to enhance representation and citizen participation, and also to align Parliament with the views of a modern republic. It was chaired by Sir Richard Cheltenham, himself a former president of the Senate, supported by Sir Roy Trotman, himself a former deputy of the Senate, and we had representation from individual professionals, but also the main opposition, Democratic Labour Party, in the person of former senator as well and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Maxine McLean. She too sat on the commission, and so we have this commission then representing our partisan democracy and our parliamentary democracy and drawing on persons who themselves have sat here in the Senate, which is a fourth layer, Mr. President, of what I will attempt to speak to today. And that fourth layer is how the recommendations of this commission collide with the work of this Senate that we are sitting in, Mr. President. So those will be the four areas that I will cover today. Mr. President, the people, based on what we saw, had quite a number of opportunities to engage. There were 10 public town halls based on the report, 13 private hearings, 55 internal meetings, and over 28,000 citizens and diaspora participants engaged in meetings to be able to give their feedback. We heard from Barbadians, professionals, citizens, members of the clergy, trade unions, and in a signal intervention, signal initiative, I should call it, there were also meetings with the diaspora, in the diaspora. And so the commission engaged with the diaspora online, and so they were able to engage in an online forum to be able to give their inputs, Mr. President. So members of the diaspora in the diaspora were able to engage with the commission here in Barbados. And so, Mr. President, coming out of that wide process of consultation, engagement, and input, I would have to say, having read the report and taken some time to go through some of the town halls and to watch some of them online and to hear the comments and the feedback, and even the comments and the feedback arising from the debate in the other place, Mr. President, there's one clear theme that we can garner. The people know that the Parliament exists, but they do not feel connected to it. They do not feel connected to it. Across the board, we heard a couple of things that I have attempted to summarize. The Parliament and the government are the same thing. Parliament debates, but it does not deliver. Politicians only act in their own interests. Members are completely unaccountable between elections. And that the Senate, this Senate, as an appointed body, lacks any democratic legitimacy. Those are the summarized points that I have pulled from the national debate, Mr. President. These perceptions then become assumptions about how government works, how government does not work. And this matters, Mr. President, not because these assumptions are accurate in all their forms, Mr. President. In some instances, people may feel that way legitimately so, and we have to address why people have felt this way about their parliament. But, Mr. President, it matters because this is about democracy. And democracy depends not just on what our institutions are or are not doing, but on how citizens feel about those institutions and how they believe they are working. So let's start to underline and get into the weeds of what some of these assumptions have been. The first one is government and parliament are the same. Mr. President, yesterday evening I was in a supermarket and it was a Tuesday. The other place meets on a Tuesday. It met yesterday. And a lady at the cash register says to me, "Oh, you just left Parliament." Now, I'm a senator, so I wasn't in Parliament in the other place yesterday, but I was happy as I was preparing for today's debate to hear her recognize me not as a minister of government, but as a parliamentarian, even if she got the day wrong. That mattered because people then are able to follow. But, Mr. President, if you look at the House, the other place, or you look at the Senate, on Parliament TV, on any given day, people don't watch it, Mr. President, except the party faithful of either side, people do not watch what happens here. Mr. President, I patronize some establishments, whether it is in my local nail salon, my local hair salon, whether I'm going to have lunch in a restaurant or in a shop. Most people have no idea what Parliament does, has done. They hear and they capture their information from social media. And social media comes with sound bites, 30 seconds long, most times, most sensational headline, usually shared by persons who themselves don't always know what they're talking about, especially as it relates to governance or government, but that's where people are consuming their information. And so when you ask somebody, or somebody asks you, but what did Parliament do on any given day? They don't have a clue. I remember, Mr. President, growing up in the days, and I'm not trying to date myself, just to be clear. I remember growing up in the days of my grandmother having a radiodiffusion in the house. I remember growing up in the days of when Parliament debates used to be carried on the radio and everybody used to listen. Not just, Mr. President, for the cut and thrust and the enjoyment that comes from parliamentarians going at each other with snarky remarks. And we have our former Senator Rawdon Adams with us today, and I'm happy to welcome him in the chamber today and happy to be able to pick on him as well because both of his ancestral predecessors would have been part of that cut and thrust of parliamentary debate. Some of the most sharp tongues and most incisive statements, Mr. President, would have come from his predecessors, his ancestors, who occupied the halls of the other place, Mr. President. So people did enjoy that, and that was the enjoyment, yes. But they also were able, in that time, to learn about and understand how government functions. Now, most people do not know the difference between what is cabinet, what is Senate, what is the House, what is the executive, and what is the judiciary. Most Barbadians no longer have that clarity. And that's a failing on our part, because teaching civics in schools, helping people to understand governance as part of their day-to-day educational process. In our households, we used to grow up, Mr. President, you had to read the newspaper. You had to watch the news. That's not a real thing anymore. Most people don't read the newspapers, and in some instances, you can kind of understand where the disconnect may come from, because sometimes you're not even seeing factual details being replicated in a way that is educational, but sometimes it is more sensational. So you want to make sure, Mr. President, that you start to address the first assumption. Government and Parliament are not the same. Many Barbadians, while they see no difference, they want to be able to understand how government functions in their interests and how the Parliament fits into that. If you ask the average Barbadian, if you walk out of Parliament now, what was one of the laws that Parliament passed that benefited them, they will not be able to say it to you, Mr. President, because they don't feel connected to Parliament. It is an abstract thing in that big building up there where people drive in their big rides and their windows up, and the police are at the corner. And so they don't necessarily associate what happens here with their daily lives. That is a challenge, Mr. President. And so the Parliamentary Reform Commission assessed this. It looked at this as an issue, and it recommended a couple of things. One, it recommended that we needed to be able to have an independently structured Parliament. A parliamentary trust fund was recommended for financial autonomy, and that there should be a Parliamentary Management Commission. Many of us sit on the Management Commission of Parliament. We're there. And so we hear the conversations that are there, but they also had some recommendations, and they also had recommendations of the Clerk of Parliament. I will await the Madam Deputy President, who I hope will go into even greater detail on these things. The second assumption, Mr. President, is related to the first one. The first one I said was government and Parliament are the same. The second assumption that I found was that Parliament does nothing for ordinary people. Parliament don't mean nothing to ordinary Barbadians. Citizens see the debates, they hear the snapshots, the 30-second sound bites, but they do not see or understand the decisions. They do not understand the scrutiny that Senator Mallalieu, for example, as an independent senator, will bring to the documents and the bills and resolutions that come here to this chamber. So the PRC report recommended 3 main interventions for that. It recommended a public communications and outreach unit, which will be responsible for producing summaries and educational content. It recommended a digital portal for real-time access to debates, votes, and committee reports. And then it also recommended a library and a research department, especially, Mr. President, I would expect for students of political science of the Barbados Community College, students of political science and international relations and governance and law at the University of the West Indies, and those who are Barbadians just interested in their governance processes. So that is meant to be there. The third assumption, Mr. President, is one that I must admit gets me every time. The third assumption was that parliamentarians are self-serving. It gets me every time, Mr. President. Public cynicism is a huge part of what Parliament is dealing with at this time. Public cynicism is perhaps, Mr. President, the greatest threat to our democracy. Fake news, twisted information, half-truths, untruths, Mr. President, being perpetuated in the public space have resulted in a loss of public trust. And so when the Prime Minister speaks at the United Nations and says about public trust eroding, what's happening globally, make no mistake about it. Public trust and the loss of public trust is resulting in public cynicism that is eroding our democracy right here at home, Mr. President, and not just overseas. And the reason it gets me, Mr. President, is this. There are a couple of reasons why it gets me, but one of them is this, Mr. President. One day, I was minding my own business, Mr. President. I was minding my own business somewhere back in 2018. I was, at the time, employed in the private sector, and it was a Saturday, to be precise, and I was at a hair salon. I was under the hair dryer, Mr. President. I remember it like it was yesterday. And my phone rang. In my mind, I am thinking, so next week, here's what I plan to do. This is what my agenda is. And interestingly enough, as I opened about Jamaica, at the time, I was living and working in Jamaica. I was a member of the executive leadership team of the University of the West Indies at regional headquarters in Kingston, Jamaica. And I was going back and forth between Barbados, where my daughter was here, and my offices were there. I think that's where I first met Senator Reid, actually, back and forth during that season. And so my phone rang Saturday morning, 2018, and it was the person who is now Prime Minister. And I said, this was the first time I had had an opportunity to speak with her after the election. And I said, is that my Prime Minister on the phone? And she answered and chuckled, and she said, yes. And I want to call you my senator. And I paused for a moment because I didn't see it coming. I told you I was minding my own business. That's how I came to find myself in this chamber in 2018. She said to me at the time, don't say anything just yet. And because I'm like a fridge I could keep, I said nothing to anyone. And I went on about my business. I said to my family, as normal, nothing. She and the Attorney General were being sworn in that afternoon, and she was going to make the announcement thereafter. And it was in that moment, Mr. President, that I then said to her, but I need to call my boss because I need to make sure that it is okay with the University of the West Indies. No problem, go ahead. Little did I know he had already been spoken to and it was fine, but it had already been queued up. Fast forward 2 years later, 2020, middle of the pandemic, or the start of the pandemic. At the time, I was chairman of the Bridgetown Port from the Senate, sitting down there by where I believe in between where Senator Nichols and Senator Trim are. And I got a call. In that time, Mr. President, we were in Worthing. We had COVID, we were meeting in Worthing. This building was under renovation. We were not in this building. And the Senate had just finished sitting, July 2020, Mr. President. And I got a call, again, from Madam Prime Minister. And she said to me, Lisa, would you join my cabinet? At the time, who wants to be Minister of Tourism when we're in COVID? It's like running to the burning bush. Nonetheless, you had no time to make a conscious decision other than to say, yes, I will serve my country. I left Worthing and hustled because she was going to make the announcement in 2 hours. 2 hours is the time that I had to make.
90 minutes.
Senator Reid is here saying he had 90 minutes when it was his time. I had 2 hours to make that decision. No, I didn't have 2 hours to make that decision. It was an instantaneous decision, and she was making the announcement in 2 hours. I had enough time to leave Worthing and get to my house to be by my mother when the announcement was being made. I did not say anything to her, and she heard it for the first time. And the truth is, and I'll say this for the first time, I cried when everybody on the outside was thinking mistakenly that I was so excited about coming into cabinet. I really was distraught because I had had such a tremendous time working with the team in the port, and I was unhappy that I was leaving. So I missed it. And I was also overwhelmed by the sheer enormity of what I had just agreed to without thought or pause. I was genuinely overwhelmed. But without consideration, Mr. President, you are asked to serve, and you serve. When you are going to apply for a job, Mr. President, you have terms and conditions of service, terms of reference, you have salary negotiations, you know what your salaries are going to be, what your salary and your allowances and your entitlements are going to be, and you come and you walk into it with eyes wide open. Does this work for me? Does this not work for me? If you are at the top of the ladder, if you're at the bottom of the ladder, you have a negotiation around whether you're going to accept this job. We made instant decisions to serve. And as I look around this room, and as I look around the Parliament more generally, there are so many persons who are here to serve, who could be anywhere else in the world, doing anything else but being here. And so, Mr. President, the decision to serve is just that, to serve. You walk away with no clarity as to what you're walking into, and you decide whatever it is, you serve. I know people, well, who took 50%, 55% salary cuts, walked away from all benefits, walked away from all allowances to serve. To serve. To serve a nation and a people without thought or pause for themselves, because it is the world's greatest honor to serve one's nation. And if you think about it, in the case of Barbados, I remember, Mr. President, thinking about how much Barbados has invested in me, in my education, in my opportunities, in my exposure, Mr. President. How could I not say yes to serve? And so when I hear people who don't know my journey, who don't know the journey or the story of many or any of the people around the room say, y'all just here for oneself, it doesn't make any sense, because it does not resonate with what our reality is. Most people would not have imagined that parliamentarians, as at we are now, do not have health insurance. Which job do you go into that does not have health insurance? Most people would not have a clue that we had to change the law a few years ago to allow us to even get vacation. How basic is that? How basic is that? When you look at what happens around the rest of the region, parliamentarians in Barbados are some of the most poorly paid, yet we are here to serve in this Senate, Mr. President. Every member of the Senate sitting here who's not in cabinet gets an allowance that is on average with what custodians have earned. But they're here serving, Mr. President, serving. And it is at sometimes hurtful to see the sacrifices that people give up to be able to serve a nation that they love more than most other things, and then to hear persons flippantly dismiss that service. But yet, we still serve, and we still stand and serve proudly, because above public opinion or public assumption is a heart for your nation and for your people. And so parliamentarians being self-serving is a second assumption, and so the PRC has addressed some of those things. It has addressed some of the reasons why people feel that parliamentarians are self-serving. It calls for a code of conduct. You can't just behave how you like. You can't say what you feel like. You can't act how you feel like, when you feel like, because you feel like. There is to be a code of conduct. On the question of remuneration, they have recommended an independent salaries review committee. It is meant to be transparent, data-based, and insulated from political interference. It talks about the regular declarations of assets and interests, therefore building accountability in the role of parliamentarians. When our people see that standards are being enforced, I expect that trust will begin to return, and that confidence in what we do and who we are will begin to return. The fourth assumption, perhaps not so much in this chamber, but in the other place, is that once elected, MPs are untouchable and unreachable until the next election. So the commission did agree with that finding in some instances, and it found that persons require accountability that was not periodic, but it was continuous. And so, Mr. President, the commission spoke about those things, and more generally, we also know that this is a reality. People want to be able to see their member of parliament. People want to be able to have their concerns responded to. It is one of the reasons why, Mr. President, I support the introduction of the idea of constituency funds. In other places like Jamaica, members of parliament have allocations for their respective constituencies so that they can do things that don't necessarily require major infrastructural works that benefit their citizens. Mr. President, I am not a constituency representative, but I walk through the supermarket and walk the street same as everybody else. I can't tell you how many times people come to me or are speaking to me and they're cursing their member of parliament over the road that ain't get fixed or over water that has not been on for a little while. And I oftentimes find myself having to defend my parliamentary colleagues and say, but you know that may be your MP. And I can tell you from where I sit, your MP, maybe my MP or somebody else's MP, is always advocating on your behalf, on constituents' behalf. But when the bureaucracy of big government gets in the way sometimes and everything is centralized in a given ministry, sometimes, as you would know better than many of us, it gets a little hard. And you are now competing with 29 other constituencies for resources that all of your constituent colleagues, your MP colleagues want. And so the assignment of resources per constituency, per number of constituents, is something that I personally believe needs to be considered favorably. The fifth assumption, Mr. President, is that politics is divisive. The only purpose that Parliament serves is to argue and to complain. And so, Mr. President, there are a number of recommendations that the Commission has come to. It says, one, that there should be the creation of a Caribbean Institute for Parliamentary Cooperation. That's meant to, to train members in ethics and procedure and governance, refresher programs, because what you learn, if it's not reinforced, sometimes it's not being administered, it's not being adhered to, wellness and inclusion facilities in Parliament, a workplace befitting public service. We spend hours in this building when here. We are here, Mr. President, most sittings of Parliament from 11 in the morning. Last week, for example, we were here until 9 in the night. What would be necessary for us to have wellness and inclusion facilities? And I could imagine, Mr. President, imagine having a Parliament that opens itself up to the implementation of the Family Leave Bill that was passed in this place just the other day, where parents who are working late in the night have the ability to have facilities for their children to come and to be here and in a safe space while they are working. So, Mr. President, the final assumption that I was referring to earlier is this one, that the Senate is undemocratic because it is appointed and not elected. Now, the Commission spent a lot of time on this one, and we will come to it in a little bit, but this is perhaps the most sensitive and maybe the misunderstood assumption of it all. They asked a couple of questions that I could see. How does a non-elected body shape and then delay the work of an elected House? And then for persons like myself, Senator Monroe Knight, Senator Reid, and Senator the Most Honorable Jerome Walcott, how do ministers sit in the Senate if ministers are supposed to be accountable to voters, but they're not elected? This is one of the other assumptions that we have heard coming from people. So let's start to deal with these concerns in the actual recommendations. One, the House of Assembly in the first instance represents the will of the people. The people decide who they want as their constituency representatives, and they constitute the majority in the House of Assembly. The Senate, however, reflects on how that will is administered. It tempers that will with a couple of things: perspective, expertise, and independence. As it stands now, the Senate is appointed from three distinct sources: the Prime Minister, who then is meant to be representing the government's legislative program based on the authority given in the other place through elections, the leader of the opposition, ensuring that there's political counterbalance. And then thirdly and finally, the President of the Republic, ensuring that through independent senators being appointed, that they represent, that they're persons who are appointed to represent the national interest beyond party lines. And so you want to be able to have that counterbalance at the Senate level to be less of the adversarial body that is the House, but that is the other place, but instead to be more reflective. And so that is what we have seen. This is what I would describe, Mr. President, as a safeguard of our democracy. It is not anti-democratic, as many people think. It is actually a safeguard. And so when ministers sit in the Senate, you have the ability to have, say, for example, Senator Reid, who I'm going to pick on initially, who is, for all intents and purposes, a techie in ways that I can't even begin to imagine. I don't know my way around a computer beyond the most basic of things. He lives, breathes, eats, sleeps technology, innovation, transformation. And so the ability of a prime minister to tap resources that sit outside of the other place that are not elected, to be able to come and add value in a technical capacity to the cabinet, which is the executive, is an important feature of the Senate, and it does allow for the government to benefit from expertise in the country. And so the PRC recommended a couple of things to be able to treat to the broad recognition of what the Senate is meant to do. One, a public education initiative that is meant to be jointly led by the Senate and the Parliament's Communications Unit, which I spoke about earlier, to have annual Senate open days, inviting schools, which we already do, civil society, which we already do, and the media itself, which they also already do, to observe deliberations, to ensure that there's greater visibility for Senate amendments, which is where we show how the Senate functions vis-a-vis what comes from the other place. And then finally, and most importantly, which I like a lot, is the recommendation for there to be collaboration with the UWI to document, to publicize, and to take public responsibility for sharing the Senate's contributions to Barbados' historical development. These are some of the things that is proposed to take place in the Senate now. If we were to step outside of Barbados and go more broadly in the Commonwealth, there are a couple of other examples of the equivalent of an upper chamber. In the UK, it's a different animal altogether, so I wouldn't even necessarily mention that one in this instance. In Canada, Canada does have a Senate as well, but it has recently been reformed to include more independent appointees, thereby ensuring that there's greater credibility for its work and greater diversity. Trinidad and Tobago also made some changes recently, and they appointed 3 constitutional authorities, and it mirrors Barbados' structure while remaining a part of their legislative scrutiny. So where we have instances of transparency and constitutional balance, as we have seen in the Senates that I have mentioned, it does strengthen our democracy. And so if I were to go specifically now on to one of the key things that occupies both the attention of both houses, I would speak, Mr. President, about the Public Accounts Committee. The Public Accounts Committee is a creature of the Constitution. It is a constitutional body. And so the role of the Public Accounts Commission is meant to have accountability across the public service and to give oversight. The Commission recommended, Mr. President, that the PAC should be strengthened with external expertise, that the reports of the PAC should be debated in both houses, and that we should have a code of conduct and an ethics committee across both houses. Once this is done, Mr. President, this also helps to add to the public scrutiny and the confidence building mechanisms that I have spoken about, Mr. President. Now, I also now want to go on, Mr. President, to the recommendation of 3 phases of implementation of the transformation that the report outlined. The recommendations are captured in what they call a 3-phase implementation strategy. In the first phase, which is the first 6 months, they've recommended that we establish the Parliamentary Trust Fund, begin drafting the Code of Conduct and the Ethics Framework, and to form the implementation of the Oversight Committee. Within 6 to 18 months, it recommends launching the Parliamentary Communications Unit. It recommends recruiting research staff and amending the standing orders to reflect the new accountability structures. In the longer term now, it recommends operationalizing the Caribbean Institute for Parliamentary Cooperation to implement public education campaigns and to review the progress every 2 years through a joint parliamentary committee. Now, in the last sections of my presentation, Mr. President, I want to focus on a couple of the recommendations that were made that reflect, again, how democracy was even at work within the Commission. The Commission, as I've already outlined, was comprised of a number of persons representing a broad cross-section of persons and the 2 major political parties. It had a number of recommendations. In the first instance, Mr. President, you had the majority opinion and then you have minority opinions. This is democracy at work. All views contended. And so, Mr. President, the first one, it talks about whether or not we should retain a bicameral system. The Commission did recommend retaining both the House of Assembly, the other place, and the Senate as an essential check and balance system. But there were proposals that came with a unicameral system. That was not supported, Mr. President. On the composition of the Senate, there was a recommendation that you could increase the number of senators from 21 to 27. Government would move from 12 to 15, opposition from 2 to 5, and independents would remain at 7, but you would broaden their representation. And then you had some recommendations on how they should be incorporated. And so that remained there. Where there was a minority opinion, Mr. President, I want to specifically speak about this. Membership, eligibility, and representation. And I'm really looking forward to hearing Madam Deputy President on these minority opinions in particular, since many of them are credited to her inputs. So on the question of dual citizenship, and former Senator Rawdon Adams, I'm happy that he is here today again, Mr. President, because on the question of dual citizenship, I remember in 2018, one of the first items that this Senate debated when I was here was the ability to allow persons who were not resident in Barbados for a period of time to be eligible to sit in the Senate. And one of the first persons who came to the Senate as a consequence of that was Senator Rawdon Adams. And so the recommendation of the majority was that we would retain the current eligibility, particularly for members who have dual citizenship, to serve as members of Parliament. There was a minority opinion that persons should be restricted and that you should not have divided national allegiance if you were to serve in high office. They did not agree. And we have already made the constitutional amendment, certainly as it relates to persons living in or outside of Barbados for a given period of time, to make them eligible to serve. There was also a recommendation, Mr. President, that you should have a youth senator incorporated between 18 to 13. We also remember in 2022, Mr. President, in this same Senate, wanting to bring the youngest senator who could have come into the chamber at 18 years old, and the national debate that ensued. What would they have to offer? What value would they add? What would they be doing in the Senate? What would they be able to offer to the conversation on national issues? But yet, Mr. President, here we are with a recommendation that we should have a youth representation, and for the record, I support it. Now, there was a recommendation that also had a minority opinion on the creation of the Parliamentary Trust Fund. They wanted to be able to use the Caribbean Court of Justice model to have the Parliamentary Trust Fund. But there was a minority opinion. The minority opinion said that it would result in, I don't want to use the language, they cited concerns about transparency and parliamentary accountability for spending. And so that was the recommendation that we have before us in the report and the minority opinion. Then, Mr. President, we serve here not by ourselves. You have the composition of the Senate as we sit, but we are guided. Successive Senates are guided each time. And many times, if you're watching on the screen, you see people moving back and forth here or any other place. They represent the office of the Clerk of Parliament. We could not do what we do without the office of the Clerk of Parliament and all of the clerks who serve Parliament. And so the report looked at the role of the Clerk of Parliament, and it made a proposal to change the role of the clerk to one akin to a Chief Executive Officer of Parliament. And it said that this would be equivalent to the role of a permanent secretary in a ministry that has administrative, operational, and financial control over the operations of the office. And that there needed to be a mechanism to allow for succession planning through assistant clerks so that you would always have professionals who were there. I've spoken enough about the PAC and I've spoken about that, but one of the key things that parliamentarians over the years have spoken about in this chamber, certainly in the Senate, has been how we treat to the work of the Law Reform Commission, the Law Review Commission, and consolidated text of legal text. And one of the recommendations of the Commission was to transfer the work of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel from the Office of the Attorney General to Parliament, which would then have allowed, Mr. President, for neutral and timely drafting of laws, and of course, the relationship between Parliament and the legislative calendar, the legislative agenda, and the office of the CPC. So, Mr. President, these are some of the items that are there that I wanted to make reference to, but I want to specifically speak to one in particular now. There was a recommendation, Mr. President, on public petitions, to introduce a public petition system. We've already established that there are a number of assumptions where people don't feel connected, people don't follow, people aren't interested, people don't understand, people don't think that they're connected to their daily lives, Mr. President. And so there was a recommendation that in response to the people's concerns, that there should be the introduction of a public petition system. And the recommendation, Mr. President, that a petition signed by 5,000 registered electors should be considered for parliamentary debate, and that the Speaker of the other place and the President of this place will jointly determine its accessibility. And so, admissibility, I'm sorry. And so, Mr. President, there are any number of things that you would want to make sure that you consider coming out of the report. Now, the report is not a done document. The report is before us in a resolution which we propose to introduce for passage today. But the findings of the report and how it's actually implemented, whether in whole or in part, will now be a matter for the Cabinet and for the legislative agenda to take responsibility for. Some things will require ordinary amendment of legislation. Some things will require constitutional amendment of legislation, Mr. President. But overall, what we are dealing with, Mr. President, is a complete transformation, as is proposed, of the parliamentary structure of Barbados. And so as I close, Mr. President, I want to thank the commissioners, from the chairman of the commissioner all the way through to the deputy and the members of the commission for its work. It has been stellar work, it has been detailed work, and the people through you and through your consultations have spoken. The question for us now here in this chamber is whether we, in the Parliament, in the Senate, will have the courage to make some of the changes that are going to be necessary to make our Parliament more fit for purpose in a new republic. So what we're looking at now, Mr. President, is really not just procedural change. It is not just institutional change, but it is a renewal of our democracy. What we're hoping to have, Mr. President, is a Parliament that is not just independent, but inclusive, modern and moral, transparent in both intention and in action. We want to be able, through this report, to show the Barbadian people that even an appointed Senate, as we are currently constituted, is representative of our democracy at its finest, and that we act with conscience here in this chamber, we act with competence here in this chamber, we act with courage here in this chamber and in the other place, and for the report to then be passed as a reflection, the resolution on the report to be passed as a reflection of our commitment that the credibility of our Parliament, the structure of our Parliament, the composition of our Parliament, here and in the other place, will determine over time the strength of this republic. And with these few words, Mr. President, I beg to move that this resolution do not pass.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummings. Her Honor, Senator Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm just organizing the reports to have them close to hand. I thank the Chamber for its suspension of the standing orders so as to give me greater time to elaborate on some of the recommendations. I do not propose it is a substantive report, substantial, upward of 200 pages, sir, and I do not propose to go through it in detail. I thank the Leader of Government Business for her presentation, which I thought was very comprehensive, and she in fact went into issues which I do not intend to cover at all, because even with extended time, clearly you will appreciate I can't cover everything. What I hope to do, since the handing in of the report in 2024, there has not been any public presentation of the broad recommendations. I really hope today to go through them and to explain some of the reasons for the majority decisions and some of the reasons for the decisions and conclusions which the Commission came to, particularly on issues that were highly controversial, like first past the post versus representational parliamentarians, or a more representational system. E penitus toto regnantes orbe Britannios. And the British rule throughout the world. Those are the words inscribed on the mace of the Parliament of Barbados. And the British rule throughout the world. Lying in the center of our democracy is a tribute and call for the perpetuation of colonialism and the rule of the British over this country and the rest of the world. And for those who asked why it was necessary, if Tim Brett don't fix it, with nothing wrong with the parliamentary system, nothing wrong with the Constitution, what we're doing. These were some of the questions which we had to face, posed to us as a commission. Why are you tinkering with this? And our answer simply was that we wanted to have here in this country a form of democracy, a form of parliamentary governance, a constitution which our people had an opportunity to contribute to say what they wanted, to have indigenous institutions and documents, governing documents, born out of our socio-cultural and socio-historical experience. But really, embedded deep in it is not the desire for the British to continue to rule the world, but for us to rule this space, giving to it greater governance, greater opportunity, greater democracy, a greater expansion of who we are as a people, embedded in the documents and in the institutions which lead and serve us as people. And so the idea of a constitutional reform commission and of a parliamentary reform commission was decided by the cabinet, even though there were overlapping areas, so that they could have a number of Barbadians give voice to the elements to which I spoke, and so that the members of the broader public could have some say. And I wish to put on record, Mr. President, sir, I begin first by thanking the Clerk of Parliament, who was the secretary to the commission, the deputy clerks who served us well, Pedro Eastman, sir, as our clerk, deputies Nigel Jones and Beverly Gibbons. Our administrative secretary was Susan Hamblin, and every meeting of the 55 Sir, there was enthusiastic participation by the staff of Parliament. Many nights the meetings went very late, as you know, and I don't want to repeat, the meetings were held outside. We had what I called Zoom hall meetings to allow the diaspora to attend and give their opinions. We invited written opinions or oral opinions from organizations, from youth to BARP, to the police, to the Auditor General, senior civil servants, former civil servants, organizations all across Barbados were invited to make contributions, either to come and present in person or to send written reports, and people did. Sir, I think we broke new ground in two significant ways. That the technology was so well utilized that at last count, over a year ago, 30,000 people had come on to the internet to view the meetings of the PRC. That is historic. It shows that there was significant interest on the part of the average citizen, even if they did not themselves send a report, that there was significant interest in this work and in its outcome. In addition to that, and again here we broke new ground, the Barbados Community College invited us as a commission to meet with and be questioned by their students. And the hall was full of young people. Even though we had a youth meeting in Queen's Park, the hall was full on that evening with BCC students, some of whom asked questions coming to their heads in the moment, and others of whom came with prepared questions to be searching questions to get answers from the commission. I have to tell you, sir, that I was not initially a member of the commission. I was added after, before the initial swearing in, but not when the commission was initially announced. And it turned out, sir, to be one of the most enjoyable assignments of my career. It really was. It was an honor and a pleasure to work with Mr. Corey Beckles, representing at that time the political party of Reverend Joseph Atherley, Dr. William Chandler, who was the youth member on the commission, Dr. Richard Ishmael, and Dr. William Chandler is a PhD, not a medical doctor. Dr. Richard Ishmael is a well-known heart specialist in Barbados, but he represented, you know, the professional class of Barbadians. Sir Roy Trotman, whose distinguished career was demonstrated at every meeting, his negotiation skills. In fact, he got a little rough with me one day. And it was interesting to watch him as a unionist and a negotiator. But really, he brought tremendous depth to the commission. Ms. Maxine McLean, who represented the Democratic Labour Party. Sir Richard Cheltenham, who was our chair, very distinguished extended career, sir, and I think this was probably a capstone contribution to the country for him, as well as for Sir Leroy, or Sir Roy, as we all call him in Barbados. And we went to the seat of the major political parties, sir. We went to George Street, and we went to 111 Roebuck Street, and we listened to what the political parties had to say. And I felt that it was important, sir, for the names to go on the record in this chamber. The Mace of Parliament symbolizes the authority of the Crown, not of the President, not of the Prime Minister, the authority of the Crown and the authority, the sovereignty, the importance of the House, the dignity of the House. It is time, sir, that our symbols and our governance become more reflective of who we are. In time, it is my hope that some Barbadians, through competition, will give us new words to put on our mace, something that reflects national pride, or rather than issues the invitation of a perpetual colonial class and perpetual colonial rule. It is my hope that this work, and we took it very seriously, sir. Many days, we met from morning to night in this chamber. We met sometimes on consecutive days. Every member of the commission took the work seriously and brought the breadth of their skills and experience, and in some instances their political bias, to bear on the discussions. And even when we disagreed, the spirit of compromise and consensus underpinned what we did, because we understood that as a commission, as a group, we were charged with an important responsibility which needed to be reflected in the quality of our output and the substance of our output. So I thank all the staff, including the marshal, the deputy marshal, and others who were very much involved in this process, and all who followed us around. There were some people who came to every meeting. I am grateful, sir, to all of them. This is not an attempt to erase history, but over the 13 chapters which constitute the report, including both the decisions and minority opinions, of which there were many, and we were careful to script our minority opinions because we wanted people to understand the rationale by which the minority views were arrived at, because we understood and recognized that with a CRC and a PRC, while we were making recommendations, government had its choice over which recommendations it would take, and it was entirely possible that they may accept some of the minority recommendations. And I would want to say, sir, that at no time did the Barbados Labour Party seek to influence me as to what I should say or do on the commission. And that was extremely liberating. At no time did they say, this is the party's position, and therefore that is the position you must carry to the commission. So I can honestly say that the opinions I expressed, including the minority opinions, the ones which did not find favor with the rest of the commission, are in fact my own thoughts and my views as a professional, as a Barbadian, and as a person who has served this country at several levels for a very long time. I start, therefore, sir, the debate around the parliamentary reform has frequently been concentrated on the issue of terms and conditions and salaries. I do not propose to have that conversation today, because once we start it, people get completely distracted from the fact that the report deals with a multiplicity of issues relating to government, and parliament that have nothing to do with terms and conditions or salaries, because that is only one small component of what it is that happens in relation to parliament. In terms of there are 13 chapters, as I indicated, 200 plus pages. In the administration of Parliament, the Parliamentary Reform Commission calls, the Parliament has 79 staff members. The space is extremely constrained. You cannot have, apart from the committee's room, the Ermi Bourne committee's room, it is not possible to have simultaneous meetings, yes, unless you go down into the dining room. It is a complex organization, not only dealing with national affairs in the lower and upper chambers, But having the Management Commission, having on its grounds a museum, it is a historic place, it has multiple functions, including the fact that it has a staff to which it must cater. And therefore, one of our first recommendations is that as a branch of the major arms of government, the executive, the judiciary, the legislature, that the person who leads this process at the level of the Clerk of Parliament should enjoy the same terms and conditions of other people who lead ministries, and he should carry, or she should carry, the rank of Permanent Secretary. They are no less a person. This is a major responsibility, and we are very fortunate because we have had clerks who have been respected throughout the Commonwealth for their expertise, their dedication. The current clerk is no different in that regard, though he gives me a lot of trouble, sir. But really, we are very fortunate, and we really must commend them, respect and remunerate them accordingly, and understand the level of responsibility. We considered that Parliament needs more space. And therefore, it was our recommendation that over time, the properties around Parliament should be purchased, and that for the physical expansion of the Parliament to have proper offices, proper facilities, even we discussed even the possibility of a gym, so that whether it's parliamentarians or the staff and you know, home care for children, because very often, whether it is parliamentarians' children or staff children, while Parliament is going on or runs late, you see people's children here from time to time, and that there should be such facilities in the space. We believe as well, sir, and it was significant that, as Bajan said, our words didn't fall from the ground, that the security here for the Parliament is lax. You come in, there may or may not be a policeman at the door. At one time, a policeman used to know every parliamentarian and their car numbers. The police don't know you. You pass by, they may or may not stop you. Yes, madam, what is it you want? And I said to one, my name is Liz Thompson, and he looked at me entirely blank. Because really, an officer providing security at the gate is supposed to know who you are and what you do. On another occasion, one said, what was your name again? You know, so we really, and it wasn't just that. It was the fact that on one day, the chairman came in and was followed by a person asking for money who could easily, could have been somebody who was unwell. We have had the budget snatched from a prime minister as he was about to deliver it right here in this Parliament. The Trinidad Parliament has experienced a coup. Parliaments all over the world have been subject to attack, and here at this one, historical relics were stolen off of the premises. Why? Because there is really no proper security. And what we recommended is that there should be a dedicated police force or security force for the Parliament, trained at the level of the police, who will have the responsibility for the security of persons and the security of the premises. Nobody should be able to walk in here at any hour of the day or night, threaten a parliamentarian, or do them harm, or carry away any historic mementos or any historic paraphernalia or any historic documents. So we believe that the security of the Parliament needs to be addressed. The Honourable Leader of Government Business spoke to the issue of our recommendations in respect of a new management commission, the structure and format and how it would function. There was a view that a trust fund should be established from which the management commission would draw its resources, and therefore that would give it independence. I gave a dissenting opinion on that because I'm saying the money is coming from government anywhere. so that the independence really should exist and the accountability should exist in the structure itself and how it functions, and that can be done without a trust fund. So government, in my view, can continue to provide the resources, as indeed it would even if it went into a trust fund, but it is the structure that becomes important. We dealt with the issue of the president, and I'm moving quickly, sir, because even though it's an hour, it's a lot to go through. We believe that the president should have a single 7-year term rather than 2 4-year terms as currently exists. There were recommendations by the public, and Commissioner Chandler argued strongly in support of the president being elected by the general public. The commission rejected that out of hand, and our view was that the dignity of the office of the president had to be maintained. And the idea of having a president out there knocking on people's doors, canvassing, begging people for a vote, people telling them, well, carry your anatomy from my place. And then it being out in the domain, oh, don't mind him or her, I knew him or her then. The kinds of things that are said about politicians. And we did not want to reduce the office of the president to that kind of spectacle and the kind of tensions that then subsequent to an election, one would have to fight to repair because the things that had been in the public domain were so unsavory. And of course, these things go all over the world now with social media, and you couldn't discount the fact that somebody would really try to be ridiculous and make offensive posts about the canvassing candidate, presidential candidate. So we did not accept that, and so the system that we currently have remains. Commissioner Chandler and I were alone in the view that the president should be a person 60 years old and not under. And we held this view because our thing was, the president, it is an honor to be president. And we believe that you should come to the post with a certain amount of maturity and experience. If you served from 60 for 7 years, at 67 you would be at Barbados' retirement age. If you came at 45, you could leave office at 52 and be butting about competing with others for jobs, sending in letters, begging somebody to employ you. And we just felt that was a little too much, the two of us, that really we want the president, this is really the end of their service to the nation. It would be a crowning achievement, and after that, the president would then go into retirement or maybe have an NGO or a think tank or something to continue to contribute to national life and national service, but they themselves would not be out there in the labor force competing with others and so on. The rest of the commission did not accept our arguments, and they felt that you could come to the presidency at any age. That will be for a matter for government to decide. It is also one of our new recommendations is that the president should be able to engage independent legal advice. Under the present system, legal advice would come from Solicitor General or Attorney General and so on. We believe that if a national issue arose, that the president felt that they wanted to have a second opinion or an independent legal advice, that they should be in a position to call for that advice and that the state would have to pay for it. And we think that that gave the president a bit more autonomy than he or she currently has under the existing legislation. We supported too, although I will not now elaborate on it, the establishment of a council of elders as a kind of advisory body to the president, to the parliament, so that people who have served in a distinguished way, achieved a great deal, whether living in Barbados or in the diaspora, who have something to contribute, could be asked to serve on this Council of Elders, and they would not come to Parliament and serve every week, and so it would be a far wider, more high-level body than that, and they would contribute to national discourse at a different level. The first past the post system, this was the other big recommendation. The majority of people making recommendations to the Parliament were concerned about the 2018 and 2022 election results. Their intent was not just to preserve democracy, even though they saw it in that regard, but to preserve the institution of the Democratic Labour Party. It was my view that it was not our responsibility to preserve the institution of any particular party, B, D, N, Q, Orange, whatever. It was not our responsibility. What we needed to do was to look at the mechanisms for the preservation of democracy so that we would never get into a position of dictatorship. And in the end, there were a number of mechanisms which we agreed to as a body that I will share with the Parliament today. We rejected the call to end the first past the post system. We rejected that call because we brought in, and sir, that was another feature of how this commission operated. We invited a number of experts from the university, internationally, from various spheres and walks of life to advise us on a number of matters and to give opinions, written and or oral, on a number of matters. When our research was concluded, sir, the preponderance of the advice, views, and data given to us showed us that when you go for representational voting, so let me explain to the public. First past the post is what we have now. The person with the largest number of votes wins. Representational systems would allow persons who have a large number of votes to also be given seats in Parliament or other opportunities to be part of the formal democratic process, even though they were not elected. We took the view that if you have been chosen by the people, you have been chosen by the people. And if they consciously decide they want a political party, not the BLP, a political organization, for whatever reason, to have all the seats, it was not our responsibility to quarrel with the electorate, because the voice of the people is the voice of God. But what we also discovered was that in those systems where there is not first past the post, you end up with a lot of coalition governments. The governments become highly unstable because there is so much fracture and conflict within the governments themselves that very often the opposition parties within the government get together and hamstring policy making, decision making, the distribution of resources, and really rein in, by reining in the government, the will of the people. They resist the very manifestos and policy decisions for which a majority of people in the country would have voted. And therefore, it was on that basis that we did not accept the arguments in favor of a representational system, but continued to support a first pass the post system with modifications. One modification, sir, is that we should always have an odd number of seats in the parliament so that there could never be a tie on any matter. One. Or tie in an election situation, which we came close to a few years ago. I think that was 2013. We believed that the speaker should be independent. That is, that he or she should not be elected from among sitting parliamentarians, but should be some other person with appropriate knowledge and experience who is brought in to perform the role of speaker. And that system exists in other Commonwealth countries. I'm not speaking in a partisan way today. And then the organization, the management of the system has to be appropriate. And I make the point that this had nothing to do with the departure of the chair of that commission from the ranks of any political organization. It is what the consensus of the commission was when we discussed the issue of parochial MPs and national MPs and federal versus local government. I'm just going through my notes. We recommended an increase, sir. Every time you have to talk about financing and political parties and money for parliamentarians, there is a lot of controversy. But the commission recommended that the vote for parliament or political parties should be moved from $300,000 to $500,000. And we looked at a formula for addressing this. Sir, I want to go back and make a correction. The consensus of the commission was that the speaker should continue to be selected in the way that he currently is. The minority opinion, which was mine, was that there should be an independent speaker. So I just want to make it clear so that there's no confusion in the way that it is reported or in the minds of parliaments, but I explained why. Because when you, apart from the numbers issue, when you become a speaker, you lose the right to advocate for your constituents. And that is the very reason that you were elected. You were not elected to chair the chamber. You were elected to serve your constituents and advocate for them, and you, in essence, lose that right. We determined, sir, that political parties in Barbados should be registered. Now, there was a lot of debate about that. We have a concept of what a political party is, but there is no legislation defining a particular party. And we believed that parties, the monies that we are saying should be voted for political parties, and I just gave the figure. And now there's a debate as to whether, given the result of the last elections and the previous one, the political party which is in the minority should be allowed access to government resources or not. The legislation doesn't currently allow it. But we are recommending, or the recommendation was, that you register as a political party. To be registered and recognized as a political party, you had to contest more than one election. You had to contest consecutive elections. You would have, and my view was that you had to show some evidence of membership. Not who the members are, but that you do have members. And there is a reason that I made that recommendation. Under the system, and I also, the commission held the view that you had to run in at least 5 seats. I think that was their view. Where mine was, you had to get at least 40% of the vote having run in 2 consecutive elections. And the reason for that is that if you said you could call yourself a political party, you could register, and if you did not have to show evidence of membership, you could get together with a few friends and relatives, register. Each of your family members could run in the 5 seats, and then you would be entitled to taxpayers' money, having called yourself a political party. And therefore, I resisted the view of the majority and insisted you would have had to run in consecutive elections. You had to get at least 40% of the vote or run in 40% of the seats, and you had to have some evidence of membership. So you aren't just handing money to scammers. Because, you know, we've had political parties that have not even made it to the end of one election cycle or the end of one election campaign. The idea that taxpayers should hand money to them and then they disappear into the woodwork and only make after that a few posts on social media, and that's the end of them, people forget they even exist. That really should not be allowed. And then, sir, the history of our experience is that you've had people like Carl Sir Auburn Haddock, who ran in every single election in Barbados, in urban Barbados, for a period of maybe 20 or 25 years. The younger people in the parliament would not know that, sir, but that would be a name known to you and me. And there were others who did it. A well-dressed man, always in a suit, very articulated. So he ran in about 5 consecutive elections. I don't think between the 5 he got 50 votes, but you could be assured that he was comfortable losing his deposit every election. Webster St. John, yes. But they would run. And if you are not careful, these people could then also try to claim entitlement to public funding. So I had a different view from the rest of the commission. I again differed from the rest of the commission on the matter of women in parliament. The chairman and I held the view that there ought to be a quota system to get women into political parties and into parliament. The reason being, the gender gap report of the World Economic Forum has indicated that the disparity, both socioeconomically and in terms of political power and political representation between women and men, stands at 165 years. It remains a fact that despite the progress or apparent progress of women, despite the fact that women are 50% of our population and are ardent and committed supporters of political parties, that they in parliament represent only between 5 to 30% maximum. And we don't have 30% in this parliament, and nor is there any entrenched system, even though we have several sitting members of parliament now, female members of parliament, that would guarantee that we would always have a large number of parliament. And in fact, I remember, sir, when the Honorable Mayor Mottley and I were elected for the first time in 1994, that Dame Billy expressed deep joy at the fact that for the first time in our history, there would be more than one woman sitting in the Parliament of Barbados. And in addition to that, there are long periods where no women sat in our parliament. So there is no guarantee, and we believe that women do have a lot to contribute, and that there should be some quota system which allows them which allows them access to seats in parliament. They have to run like everybody else, fight to win like everybody else. You're not handing them a seat, but you're giving them opportunity. And it doesn't mean that the quality of candidate will be whittled down, because good candidates can be found and good candidates will come forward, in my view. There was a recommendation, or there is in the report, and this was another recommendation that attracted a minority opinion. There was in the report a recommendation on the capping of the size of the cabinet. The view, I'm not going to go into the numbers, but the view of the majority was that Parliament, the size of the cabinet should be capped in terms of the number of parliamentarians that exist. I think that they said the number should be 12. I don't recall the exact number off the top of my head, but the principle was that there should be a cap on the size of the cabinet. I think that was the recommendation, but that wasn't the majority. The chairman of the commission, Sir Richard Cheltenham, rejected any fetters on the power of a prime minister. He believed that a prime minister and a prime minister alone who was popularly elected by the public of Barbados, they and they alone had the right to decide what size cabinet, who would be in the cabinet, what ministries they would have reflective of their policy positions, of the future direction they propose to carry the country, and of the vision and aspirations of the nation as shared with them and as demonstrated through their manifesto. I took the view, and so that was Sir Richard's view. I had a slightly different perspective. My view was that there should be a cap, yes, but the cap, that the cabinet should not exceed a certain percentage of the elected parliamentarians, so that that view was halfway between Sir Richard and the rest of the commission. I didn't think that you should necessarily constrain the prime minister's decision-making processes, but if you gave a prime minister complete freedom, which has happened, not in Barbados, but has happened elsewhere, that the backbench had all of 2 people on it or some such. So to prevent that, because at that point it is a nonsense in my view. You really should not have a cabinet that is that large. So that to prevent that, I indicated, or my view was that the number of, the size of your parliament, of your cabinet, should be a percentage of those elected, not just left at large. We decided, the majority view was that so I'm turning to a different area, but still on the composition of the parliament. We agreed on the retention of the Senate, a bicameral legislature, as part of our governance system. And we took the opinion that the Senate normally has greater freedom than the lower house, that professionals of experience, of integrity, who have something to offer are often selected, or Barbadians, I shouldn't say professionals, because I don't want it to be believed that I'm speaking only to the professional class. A wide number of persons have come to the Senate in the past from all walks of life, but we believed that those voices need to be heard, and that very often the quality of challenge and debate within the Senate, and you have to agree that this Senate has rejected legislation which came from the lower house. This Senate has reprimanded the lower house. Well, perhaps I should not say reprimand, because I don't want people to run with that word, but this Senate has indicated unhappiness with legislation, with errors in legislation, with the objectives of legislation, the language of legislation, and so on, and sent it back to the lower house for amendment or review. And we believed that that kind of independence, that kind of integrity, that kind of willingness to say to the government, listen, I hear you, but you gotta hear me now. And I walk in with you. That was an important check and restraint to have in the Parliament of Barbados, and that we should not reject the idea of the work and value of a bicameral legislation. We believed that the Senate, now composed by representatives from government, from the opposition, and from, if the honourable senator would wait just a minute, I want to make just one point very quickly. Yes. We indicated that it was our view that the opposition should, where in a situation as happened in 2018 and 2022, the opposition was not represented in the lower house because they received no seats, that the legislation should be amended to give the party getting the second largest number of votes in an election seats as opposition members in the Senate of Barbados. That was one of the ways in which we dealt with the 2018 and 2022 result. So that the will of the people, in terms of the numbers that the second largest party with the second largest number of votes got, would be reflected by them getting seats in the Senate and by that being legislated for. So we were very sensitive, even though we rejected the proportional representation argument. We asked ourselves as a commission how we could address that to make sure that a party getting perhaps 40 or 45% of the vote or 49% of the vote still had a voice in the public space, even though they had no elected parliamentarians. And I did indicate that while we rejected the notion of proportional representation, we looked at a number of mechanisms to ensure the continuation of democracy and that it was alive and well. We took a decision that the way independent senators are appointed ought to be changed. The President of Barbados now has the authority in law to appoint 7 senators. We took the view that the President should be allowed to appoint a number of senators, a smaller number of senators, in his or her name, but that since senators are supposed to represent a variety of interests in government or in the nation, in the nation's governance, in the nation, that we should ask various agencies to nominate a person to the president to be a senator. So if the president, for instance, under the current iteration, wanted to have somebody representing small business, the president, in his or her own advice, could select Mary Ogobo, and I'm just calling that name because I don't think we have a Mary Ogobo in Barbados, and I don't want anybody to say I'm identifying a person. However, based on our recommendation, the president would have to consult with small business organizations, BARVEN and the SBA and other small business entities to get recommendations, and from those recommendations, then the person would be chosen, so that the person was truly representative of those interests. Once appointed, and this is not specifically dealt with, but it is an interesting and I think perhaps a live issue. Once appointed, there is no provision for an independent senator not to be changed. If you think about it, there are circumstances which may warrant change. If a senator became unwell but decided they were not resigning, there's very little you could do about it. If, for instance, circumstances in the country change, let me give you an example. We had COVID. Let us suppose that the president determined that COVID is a major national issue and that he or she would appoint Dr. Corey Ford, who is the COVID specialist, to sit in the Senate. But then let us suppose that the threat of COVID passed, and you then had a number of cyber assaults, and you wanted then to appoint a cybersecurity expert. Well, the law does not allow Dr. Ford to be changed. So even though you needed that expertise, you have no mechanism for bringing it in. So this is what I mean when there are circumstances that would warrant that kind of flexibility, and perhaps it is something we should consider, but the truth is it was not specifically included in the report of the commission. I'm just raising it at this time. It was determined that the office of the Deputy Prime Minister should be established. A Deputy Prime Minister is now appointed as a matter of choice by the existing Prime Minister. We believed that there was a recommendation for the appointment of the office of the entrenching of the office of Deputy Prime Minister with particular criteria for how that person would serve and in the circumstances in which, but the person would not automatically become Prime Minister in the event that, let's say, a Prime Minister took unwell or was changed somehow. There were particular criteria, and I can't go into it because the chair has signaled that I don't have significant time left, and there is one last area with which I want to deal. So, the last area with which I want to deal is the issue of the methods by which the commission sought to expand the voice of the public in engaging with Parliament. We believe, sir, that in an era where people have access to technology, where people are able to give an opinion on everything or to know in real time what is taking place across the world and have perspectives on how it impacts them, we believed that an opportunity should be given to the public to have an enlarged voice in their Parliament and in the affairs of Parliament. And we did that by a number of mechanisms. Senator Malulu would be pleased to hear that it was our perspective that when questions on urgent public business or when questions were posed by private members, that these questions ought to be answered within 12 weeks, that they could not be left on the order paper or left at large or ignored indefinitely, that they had to be addressed. I don't know, in time that may come to be known as the Malulu Amendment, but we will see if it happens or not. We believed that there should be a vigorous question time of the Prime Minister, that the Prime Minister has a responsibility to the country to face questions as Prime Minister about his or her leadership, about his or her cabinet, about his or her decisions, about his or her policies, about his or her perspective, and be challenged on the floor of the Parliament by a vigorous opposition, not directed by malice or necessarily by gaining cheap political points, but in litigating the affairs of the country and the interests of the average Barbadian. It was our view that there should be a system of urgent questions which should be allowed onto order papers, and that there would be a mechanism for doing so. So let us assume that there was a situation, as we had a couple weeks ago, where a ZR or minibus overturned and you have people injured. And that excited questions about the operations of public sector vehicles, public service vehicles. It excited operations about the quality of drivers. What mechanisms the owners put in place to protect the public. What criteria a driver or standards and qualifications is a driver supposed to meet. A member of parliament could put that on the order paper as a matter for urgent discussion, and government would have to discuss it. So we felt that there was value in responding to the dynamics of the social environment by creating this mechanism for that kind of discussion. We believe, sir, that there should be an opportunity for constituents' questions that a parliamentarian could place and should be able to place on the order paper a question relating to a matter in their constituency. Would the government, whether they're our minister or not, would the government say, when it proposes to fix the road at X place, Y place, which has now been in a state of disrepair for 3.5 years? I am not presuming to identify what range of questions parliamentarians will choose, but it would certainly give to the parliamentarian the opportunity to put on the order paper a matter which allows them to better serve the public and to speak on their matter outside of the estimates and budget debate, which is the opportunity that parliamentarians, particularly backbenchers, take to speak to parochial or to constituency matters. Equally, it would allow a cabinet minister to be able to raise certain issues. We believed as well that there should be a system of public petitions and all of these mechanisms to which I'm speaking. And you will notice that, sir, there are many new things, many new approaches recommended by the PRC, but I cannot and do not have time to elaborate on them. But really, there's much for people to discuss. That a system of public petitions so that, and questions, so that a member of the public could have a question that they want parliamentarians to answer. They come to the parliament or they email, they tell the clerk, I want to ask the parliament X question, and it is certified by the president or by the speaker as a fit issue for discussion, and it has to go on the order paper for discussion because it is a matter of significant interest by the public. Equally, public question time, members of the public could ask questions. So that is important. There would be a code of conduct for parliamentarians known as the Trident Code, and it is in fact aspirational, regulatory. It deals with issues like accountability, sexual harassment, but Trident is an acronym meaning trustworthy, respected, informed, dutiful, ethical, noble, and truthful. Those are the characteristics which we think the people we elect should have, should model, should represent, and the code of conduct which governs their behavior should fall within those parameters. Mr. President, sir, I started by saying that serving on this commission gave me immense professional and national fulfillment. It really did. I hope, as I indicated, sir, I could not cover in an hour all of the provisions, but I very, very much hope that members of the chamber today and members of the public have seen the extent to which this commission went, not to tinker with the process, but to ask itself, what do we have that has value, which we would want to retain, and how, given our history, given our experience, given our aspirations as a nation, and given the fact that we are now a republic, how would we want to augment, transform, modify, and change that which we have to expand our democracy, to give our citizens a larger voice, to reflect further and more deeply the aspirations and characteristics and defining principles of Barbadians as a people and Barbadians as a nation. The content of the report is not going to please everyone, but I commend it to the government of Barbados. We did our work. You asked us, and the terms of reference were read into the record by the leader of government business. You asked us to conduct a certain amount of work within the terms of reference. We, sir, believe that we have satisfied our conscience and the terms that you have given us. And we urge the government of Barbados, do not let this lie on a shelf. Start to work towards the implementation of what the cabinet, in its wisdom, with the advice of the general public and with calls from the general public, will determine they want to use in the national interest. Mr. President, sir, I am obliged.
Thank you very much, Her Honor, Senator Thompson. Senator Worrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in making my contribution today, I first would like to, as with the leader of government business, acknowledge what has happened in Jamaica and still going on throughout the Caribbean, also Cuba, possibly Bahamas and Bermuda, in terms of the passage of what is probably, well, being seen as one of the worst hurricanes for a number of years, Hurricane Melissa. So we extend wishes to the people of